a deep discussion on writing well. You're going to listen to two people discussing the book Writing with Style, The Economist Guide. The language used is highly advanced. So, listen closely, grab your dictionary and take notes of all new words you come across. By the end of this video, you'll have learned a lot.
Welcome, dear listeners. Today we are going to discuss The Economist Guide for Writing with Style. So let's get the ball rolling.
We are indeed. We're diving deep into the principles that make writing clear, effective, really impactful, all based on The Economist's own style guide.
And the idea here is to give you more than just rules, right? It's about understanding how to make your writing work, whatever you're writing.
Exactly. It's the why behind it. Not just a checklist, but making conscious choices. Choices that, well, respect your reader and make sure your message hits home, whether it's an email or, a big report.
And the book we're drawing from is The Economist Guide for Writing with Style by Lane Greene. Okay, so foundations first. You can't really talk clear writing without bringing up George Orwell, can you?
No, you really can't. And The Economist's approach definitely echoes Orwell's 6 rules. They're right there at the start of the guide, actually. A great way to frame everything else.
Okay, rule 1. Never use a metaphor, simile, or other figure of speech which you are used to seeing in print. That's interesting. Why avoid the familiar ones?
Well, think about it. When you see something totally new, it grabs you, right? But something you've heard loads of times.
It just washes over you.
Pretty much. Your mind kind of wanders. The guide suggests these predictable phrases mean the reader isn't truly engaged with what you're saying anymore.
Keeps the reader present. Okay, rule 2 feels simpler. Never use a long word where a short one will do.
What's the magic of short words?
They're just clear, direct, less chance of being misunderstood. And the guide uses that great Churchill quote.
Oh, the one about short words.
Yeah, short words are best, and old words, when short, are best of all. They cut through the noise.
And following that theme, rule 3. If it is possible to cut a word out, always cut it out. Just getting rid of the fluff.
Absolutely. Every single extra word adds a bit to the reader's mental effort, Being concise respects their time, makes the main point stand out more.
Rule 4. Never use the passive where you can use the active. We hear this one a lot. Why is active voice generally better? Well, in an active sentence, the subject does the action. So it's really clear who's doing what. It makes the writing more, direct, energetic, and usually easier to follow.
Got it. Okay, rule 5, back to word choice. Never use a foreign phrase, a scientific word, or a jargon word if you can think of an everyday English equivalent. This feels like it's all about accessibility.
Precisely. Plain English just opens your writing up. You avoid putting up barriers with, overly technical stuff. And it actually forces you, the writer, to be really clear in your own head first. Can't hide fuzzy thinking behind jargon.
Makes sense. And the last one, rule 6, is kind of a safety valve. Break any of these rules sooner than say anything outright barbarous. So they're guidelines, not rigid laws.
Exactly right. Clarity and impact are what matter most. Sometimes sticking to a rule too rigidly makes things sound awkward or just plain wrong. You have to prioritize making sense.
Okay, so those are the Orwell foundations, really about respecting the reader, making it easy for them. Now let's zoom in on specific word choices The Economist likes, starting with old and short words. We touched on this, but why are they so effective?
Beyond just being clear, the guide talks about the subtle differences, the nuances, between words that seem similar, like aid, assist, support.
Right, they all mean help, but different kinds of help.
Exactly. It's about picking the precise word, not just grabbing any old synonym. It's about getting the nuance right.
Yeah, it's not just a thesaurus job. The guide mentions thin versus skinny. Skinny feels a bit more negative.
Totally. Or think about get versus obtain. You wouldn't really say you obtain a drink at a party, would you?
No, sounds a bit stuffy. You'd get a drink.
Right, context matters, how the language actually flows.
And the guide links these subtle differences back to the history of English. The Norman Conquest, the Renaissance, how they layered our vocabulary.
Oh, this is fascinating. You essentially end up with multiple words for the same basic idea, often with different levels of formality. The Norman French words, like royal, often sound a bit more official.
Compared to the older Anglo-Saxon ones like kingly.
Exactly. Kingly feels maybe more direct. Then you might get a Latin one like regal, adding another layer again.
So we have these parallel tracks of words, each with its own flavor. And the Renaissance added even more from Latin and Greek, often for more abstract or intellectual stuff.
Precisely. Words like diocese from Latin, chaos from Greek. Sometimes they pushed out older words. Sometimes they just existed alongside, giving us, a richer set of choices. Think shirt, which is Germanic, versus skirt, which came from Old Norse, or homicide, clearly Latin.
So understanding that history helps explain why words feel different. Okay, let's move on to nouns. The guide says person, place, or thing isn't the whole story.
No, because it's about what nouns do in a sentence, their function. Are they the subject, doing the action, the object receiving it, or showing possession?
And there's a key distinction. Concrete versus abstract nouns. Why are concrete nouns generally preferred?
Well, concrete nouns, things you can picture, touch, they make writing more vivid. They tend to attract stronger, more active verbs. They ground things.
Which leads to a warning about overusing abstract nouns, especially these things called nominalizations. Okay, what are those exactly?
A nominalization is basically when you take a verb or an adjective and turn it into a noun. Think investigation from investigate. They're not always bad, but too many can make writing clunky, indirect, wordy.
Got an example.
Sure, instead of, say, demonstrates an unwillingness to, you can just write refuses to, much sharper. Or the guide's example, the proliferation of abstractions exhibits a deadening tendency upon writing.
Whoa, that's a mouthful.
Right. Compare that to empty words deaden writing. Much better. Punchier.
It's like sucking the action out. The guide also mentions euphemisms and exaggeration. What's the advice there?
Use clear, direct language, even for tough subjects. Accuracy first, always, but don't soften things so much you hide the truth. They give examples like saying people sleep in rough instead of just homelessness, or being specific like torture or murder instead of vague human rights abuses.
Be direct, but also accurate. Don't overstate things either.
Exactly. Avoid exaggeration. Let the facts do the talking.
Okay. What about verbing nouns? Making verbs out of nouns. Some are okay, like contact or host, but the guide seems wary.
Yeah, language changes. Some words naturally become verbs. But the warning is against just making them up on the fly. Unless you're like Shakespeare or aiming for a very specific effect, you're probably just going to annoy people.
Like using to impact or to access.
Or to showcase, to source, to segue.
Yeah.
Still great on a lot of ears. Better to find a proper verb if you can.
Right. Okay, nouns done. Let's talk about verbs that do something. The guide says they're more than just action words.
That's right. Verbs are the engine, the pivot point of the sentence. They make the assertion. Even state of being verbs like be, seen, remain. They're doing crucial work.
And like we said with nominalizations, the guide pushes for lively verbs. Why are they so key?
Because lively verbs are precise. They pack more meaning. Think walked versus strutted or shuffled.
It paints a much clearer picture.
Exactly. That specific verb tells you how they walked. Often means you don't need an extra adverb like proudly or slowly. Make your verb strut, as the guide says.
I like that. And there's an interesting link made between concrete nouns, active verbs, and logical clarity. How does that work?
When your language is grounded in tangible things and clear actions, any gaps in logic or weird connections become much more obvious. To you and to the reader, it's harder to fudge things.
Okay. Now, for people dealing with specialized fields, there's advice on when and how to use specialist terms. What's the main idea?
First, figure out which technical terms are absolutely essential. The core concepts you'll use again and again. Those you need to sort of teach the reader.
Explain them clearly. Maybe use an analogy.
Exactly. Define them simply. But for terms that are less crucial or only pop up once or twice.
Just rephrase them in everyday language.
Usually the best bet. Like the guide's own examples. Instead of syntax, maybe say how words are put together. Or for morphology, something like how words and their parts are formed.
Makes sense. And what about acronyms and initialisms? The Economist isn't a fan.
They really advise against overusing them. Strongly, even if you define them up front. Making the reader constantly recall what HG or QWERTY stands for just trips them up. Makes the text feel dense, unwelcoming.
So use short descriptions instead, like the condition or the system.
Yeah, or simple synonyms. Almost always better for flow and readability.
Right. Now for a section with a memorable title. The Basket of Deplorables. Annoying words. What kind of words end up in this basket?
Yes. The idea is to avoid words that sound, well, a bit voguish, maybe self-important or just plain vague or misleading, words that the Economist editors find often weaken writing.
Give us some examples. Address as a verb is in there.
Yeah, the thinking is often a simpler verb like deal with or tackle is clearer and less, well, pretentious. Others include aspirational, often just vaguely positive, or facilitate, which can be a fancy way to say help or enable.
Famously is question too.
Right. If it's genuinely famous, maybe you don't need to label it as such.
Okay. And words like high profile and iconic are flagged individual instead of person.
They've just become overused cliches, haven't they? They often don't add much specific meaning anymore. Person is usually more direct than individual. High profile and iconic get thrown around so much they lose their punch.
And there's inform when it really means influence, implode, used loosely, key as an adjective.
Yeah, key point. Well, if it wasn't key, why mention it? Major is another one. Sometimes cutting it makes the sentence stronger. And move is a sort of bland substitute for decision or policy.
The underlying theme seems to be choose precise, direct words, avoid trying too hard to sound important. This section also dives into business jargon.
Oh, yes. Some real gems in there, chunking up to a meta level.
What does that even mean?
Who knows? Others, like the other side of the visionary coin, taking up limited bandwidth fruitfully, or joining the dots while walking the walk. The point is, even if a phrase starts out fresh, it can become a tired cliche really fast and just sound hollow.
Okay, let's move from annoying words to dying metaphors. What's the issue with using metaphors that are, well, overused?
They've lost their power. Their original imagery is gone. Think iron will or wing the changes, toe the line.
They don't make you see anything anymore.
Exactly. They're just sort of there. Orwell said writers use them because they're easy, ready-made phrases, but they make the writing dull, lifeless.
The guide says they have a narcotic effect, which is quite a phrase itself. They just lull the reader.
Pretty much. Whereas a fresh original image can really wake the reader up, make them think. These old ones can even be confusing if people only half remember the original meaning.
What about faulty analogies when a comparison goes wrong?
This is when the comparison you're using doesn't quite fit or breaks down if you look too closely. The blockchain example is good. Calling it a distributed ledger is helpful up to a point.
But you need to explain the differences, too.
Exactly. Otherwise, the analogy itself can be misleading. You have to acknowledge its limits.
Okay. Then there's borrowing specialist terms using technical words loosely.
Yes, the warning here is that words often have very precise meanings in specific fields. Think crescendo. In music, it's a gradual increase, not just the peak. Using these terms inaccurately in general writing can just cause confusion, especially for readers who know the real meaning.
And similarly, cultural cliches. Avoid the predictable national stereotypes.
Please. Steer clear of the easy, lazy references, always mentioning tango for Argentina, or endless vive la différence for France, or mind the gap for, well, anything. They add nothing.
Got it. Let's talk cutting words, redundancies. This seems straightforward. Trim the fat.
Absolutely. Words like now, currently, at present are often redundant with present tense verbs. Real is often extra unless you mean, say, inflation adjusted.
Starting sentences with there is or there are.
Often weaker. You can usually rephrase more directly. And phrases like ability to or skills to can nearly always become just can.
The guide lists loads of examples. Absolute certainty is just certainty. Pilotless drone, well, drones are pilotless, so just drone. Raise to the ground is just raise.
Exactly. Track record becomes record. Wilderness area, just wilderness. For free, just free. End result, just result. It's about cutting words that don't add new information. Being efficient.
Okay, now a potentially sensitive area. Oak language. How does the Economist approach this?
Cautiously. The advice is to be careful with terminology that might be favored by certain groups, academics or activists, but isn't universally understood or accepted yet. The main duty, the guide stresses, is to the truth and clarity.
It mentions trends like enslaved people instead of slaves, or people experiencing homelessness instead of homeless people.
Yes, it acknowledges the intention behind these shifts, focusing on the person rather than the condition. But it also notes that sometimes new terms can pick up negative baggage too, over time. The main thing is clarity.
And it advises against using adjectives as nouns like blacks, gays, and using community too broadly.
Right. Better to be specific, say, black people or gay people, and instead of, say, the LGBTQ plus community, maybe specify if you mean activists or organizations or just people in general. It also questions whether euphemisms like disadvantaged or underprivileged actually help, or if they can sometimes obscure the reality of poverty.
Okay, a careful balancing act there. Let's shift to grammar and the guide's approach. Keep it short. It frames grammar not as rules, but as a toolkit.
Yeah, which is a nice way to think about it. Grammar gives you the tools to build good sentences. And the big emphasis here is on short sentences for making your writing memorable.
Why are short sentences easier to remember? Something about working memory.
Exactly. Our working memory, the bit that juggles information as we read, can only hold so much. Long, complicated sentences with lots of clauses just overload it. Makes it harder to grasp and remember the point.
So the humble full stop is your friend.
Your best friend. More short sentences generally mean more clarity, more memorability. The guide even breaks down that famous long opening sentence of A Tale of Two Cities to show how shorter chunks make it easier.
Right, avoid those complex nested sentences. Okay, another grammar staple. Passive versus active. We know active is usually subject, verb, object.
Yep, that's the standard direct structure. The subject does the verb to the object. Passive is when the subject receives the action. Like, this guide is read by many instead of many people read this guide.
And active is generally better, more direct.
Yeah.
But passive isn't inherently wrong.
No, not at all. It has its uses. Maybe you want to emphasize the thing being acted upon, or maybe you don't know who did the action, or it's not important. The Abraham Lincoln example in the guide illustrates this well.
But beware the short passive where the doer is left out entirely. That can be evasive.
It can be, yeah.
Yeah.
Mistakes were made. Who made them? Sometimes it's used to dodge responsibility.
Okay. What about the little words that matter? Like the, a, that, which. Why are they crucial?
They might seem small, but they're vital for avoiding ambiguity. The guide's example about the horse that was trained versus the horse trained shows how adding that makes it clear which horse we're talking about. Precision.
Let's talk punctuation. The guide admits many rules are just style choices, but some are key for clarity. Commas, for instance.
Right. Commas, separate list items, set off extra bits of information. But the big non-negotiable rule is don't splice two complete sentences together with just a comma. That's a comma splice.
Use a semicolon instead.
Or a conjunction like and or but.
Exactly. Or just make them two separate sentences. The guide also mentions the Economist avoids the serial comma, the last comma before and in a list. That's just their style choice.
And hyphens. Their job is to link words acting as one unit. Yeah, like an interest rate rises, the hyphen shows interest rate is a single concept modifying rises. It avoids confusion. Like high school teachers in high school, versus high school teachers who are high.
Right. Okay, on to other common confusions. First up, whom feels tricky.
It does feel a bit formal now, doesn't it? Its role is as an object pronoun, like him or her. The guide has a simple test. If him fits, whom is technically correct. You saw him. Whom did you see?
But if it sounds stuffy, maybe rephrase.
Often the best solution, yeah. Avoid sounding unnatural.
I versus me, especially with other people involved, you and I or you and me.
The rule's simple. Use the pronoun you'd use if it were alone. I went, so you and I went. He gave it to me, so he gave it to you and me. The other person doesn't change the grammar.
Right. Singulars, plurals, subject-verb agreement. Mostly easy, but some tricky bits. Words ending in AX, collective nouns.
Yeah, politics can be singular or plural, depending on context. Collective nouns like team or staff can be singular if acting as a unit, plural if acting as individuals. Companies and countries usually take singular verbs. Just need to pay attention.
The subjunctive sounds scary. What's it for?
It's for hypotheticals, wishes, demands things not stated as fact. If I were rich, I demand that he be present. It often uses verbs like where or the base form of the verb.
But it can sound quite formal, especially in British English.
It can, yeah. Often you can rephrase more naturally using should or just a more direct structure.
Okay, the split infinitive. The old rule about not putting words between to and the verb, like to boldly go, where does the guide stand?
It says, ignore that old rule. It was based on a faulty comparison with Latin and often makes sentences awkward. Put the modifier where it sounds clearest and strongest, even if that splits the infinitive.
Good to know. What about ending sentences with prepositions? Another rule to break.
Absolutely. That's another Latin-based idea that just doesn't fit natural English. Who did you give it to is perfectly fine. Trying to avoid it often sounds incredibly stilted.
And finally, in grammar, gendered pronouns. Using he as the default is out.
Generally, yes. The guide recommends making the subject plural if you can. Readers should check their facts. Or just rewriting to avoid the pronoun, and it fully endorses using singular they.
Singular they, as in someone left their coat?
Exactly. It's been used for centuries, it's inclusive, and it solves the problem neatly. The guide gives examples of The Economist using it. No one likes having their opinions questioned. It works.
Okay, grammar covered. Let's tackle numbers. Starting with general numeracy and the big one. Correlation is not causation.
Super important. Just because two things happen together doesn't mean one caused the other. The classic example. Ice cream sales and crime rates both go up in summer. One doesn't cause the other. The heat influences both.
Right. What about explain variance? Sounds technical.
It is a specific statistical term. The key thing for writers is not to misinterpret it as proof of causation or necessarily indicating a large practical effect.
And that links to significance versus effect size. A result can be statistically significant, but still tiny in real-world terms.
Exactly. Statistical significance just means it's unlikely the result is due to random chance. Effect size tells you how big the difference or relationship actually is. You need to consider both.
Also crucial, baselines. A 100% increase sounds huge, but if you started from 1 and went to 2, maybe not so impressive.
Context is everything with numbers. Always look at the starting point.
And get the terms right. Percentages versus percentage points. A drop from 10% to 8% is 2 percentage points, not a 2% drop.
Correct. Terminology prevents confusion and misrepresentation. A 2% drop would be down to 9.8%. Big difference.
And averages, mean, median mode. Mean can be skewed by outliers.
Hugely. Think house prices. A few mansions can pull the mean, the average, way up. The median, the middle value, often gives a better sense of the typical house price in that case.
The guide also warns against dodgy comparisons, like comparing Apple's market value to India's GDP. They measure different things. And suggests stating changes clearly. Old value first, then new.
Makes it much easier to follow. And use significant zeros properly to show precision. Oh, and compare with 1/3 as heavy is clearer than 3 times lighter.
Right. Now for specifics. Numbers, business, finance, economics, science, starts by warning against impenetrable jargon.
Yeah, terms like derivatives or collateralized debt obligations often seem designed to confuse. The aim should always be clarity and accuracy, especially with finance.
It explains key profit measures, gross, operating, EBITDA, net income, and their pitfalls, like adjusted EBITDA, and the difference between cash flow versus sales.
Fundamental stuff for understanding business health, explained concisely.
Banking terms can be weird, too. Loans are assets, deposits are liabilities.
Counterintuitive, right? The guide advises avoiding terms like debits and credits for a general audience and spelling things out clearly.
Like saying 1/4 of a percentage point instead of 25 basis points, and explaining basic market ideas.
Exactly. Define terms like treasuries. Explain why bond prices fall when interest rates rise. Don't assume knowledge.
Then, the dismal science economics. Define GDP. Always use real GDP for growth.
Yes, adjusted for inflation. Don't just look at the nominal figure, and don't oversimplify the GDP equation or job creation figures. Understand the difference between short-term fluctuations and long-run growth drivers.
Explain different ways of measuring growth year on year, quarter on quarter, annualized, and compare big numbers to GDP for scale.
All good advice for making economic data understandable and putting it in context.
Finally, science and maths. Be precise. Exponential growth isn't just fast growth. Claims about risk need careful wording, and clarify global warming versus climate change.
Precision is vital when borrowing from science to avoid spreading misconceptions.
Okay, huge amount on numbers and words. Let's get to editing. The editor's role is
to be the reader's champion, basically, to help the author produce the best possible version of their work, not to rewrite it in the editor's voice. Spot confusion, weak arguments, boring bits.
Criticism should be about the writing, not personal, and offer solutions.
Ideally, yes. Constructive criticism. And the Economist editing motto is interesting. Simplify, then exaggerate.
Meaning, be clear about uncertainty, but stand firm on strong evidence.
Exactly. Cut wishy-washy words like arguably, somewhat, possibly, but also challenge bold claims that aren't backed up.
And engage with the strongest counter-arguments, steel manning, not weak ones, straw manning. But avoid false balance.
Right. Address the real challenges. To your point, don't pretend weak arguments have equal weight if they don't. Pacing is also key. Vary the speed. Use signposts for tricky parts.
Good editing also cleans up remaining jargon, cliches, acronyms, cuts fluff.
Yep. Final polish. Watch out for too many superlatives. Let the facts impress. Cut unnecessary little words, but never sacrifice clarity. The reward is often space for telling details or a great quote.
And after editing comes proofreading, final checks. Print it out. Read aloud.
Both are great tips. You spot things differently on paper. Reading aloud catches awkward phrasing your eyes might miss. Focusing on one type of error at a time can also help just look for typos, then just for punctuation, etc.
Spell check helps, but isn't foolproof.
Definitely not. It won't catch correctly spelled wrong words, for instance. Need human eyes.
Okay. Lastly, the guide has style guide specifics, an AZ list. Covers lots of detailed points.
Yeah, it's the really granular stuff. Capitalization, company names, countries, dates, italics, plus clarification on tons of commonly confused words illustrating the principles we've discussed.
Like aggravate versus irritate, comprise usage, disinterested versus uninterested, like versus as. Lots of potential traps.
Loads of them. It's a very practical section. Also covers numbers, measurements, cliches to avoid, and has a useful glossary of grammar terms.
Wow. A really comprehensive guide, so a huge amount there. Well, dear listeners, we have certainly taken a deep dive into the Economist Guide for Writing with Style today.
We have. And I think the real takeaway, the core message, is that clear thinking underpins clear writing. The guide offers so many practical ways to hone both, to make your ideas land with more force, more persuasion.
Hopefully this discussion has armed you with some useful tools and maybe a new way of looking at your own writing. And for our final thought today,
Start paying closer attention, really noticing the impact of word choices everywhere, not just in formal writing, but in emails, in conversations.
see how clear, concise language affects how well people understand things, how persuasive it can be.
Exactly. It's a skill that sharpens everything you communicate. Definitely something worth thinking about.
Thank you for listening to English Audio Lounge. We hope you have enjoyed it. Stay tuned for more audio stories and video classes to improve your English.